Okay, can we all see my screen? Okay, and you guys all found that document okay? So let's just go ahead and start by just naming some of these bony landmarks. I may go ahead and call on some of you because this is some good review to do real quick. So I'm going to start labeling this one to start. I'll put a little star by it. Jen, can you go ahead and tell me what bony landmark that is?
Is that the superior angle of the scapula?
Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and write in there that this is my superior angle. That means if I had to say what this was and I had a line to kind of fill this out, that Brianna, could you tell me what that is?
The spine of the scapula.
Perfect. Charlie, could you go ahead and tell me what this is?
That is the acromion process.
Nice. And then, Kyle, could you go ahead and tell me what this one is?
So is that the lateral border?
Maybe not the lateral border. Maybe my drawing isn't good enough. This will be an articulation site. George, you want to tell me what that is?
The fossa, like, is it
The
like glenoid? Okay. Oh, okay.
glenoid fossa. Yep, this is where my humerus is going to articulate. So Kyle, you are definitely right that this is more lateral. So that if I really had to label, say, this edge over here, then Garrett, could you tell me what that edge is?
The medial border of the scapula.
Perfect. Okay. And then I'm just going to go ahead and fill like this little one out down here. This is my inferior angle of the scapula as well. So now we're kind of oriented, yes? There are a couple more things, and we did see this as like not a drawing. We saw this on the cadaver. What is this particular image, Samantha? Or this little structure I just pointed to? You're muted.
I'm gonna phone a friend.
Okay. Rebecca, do you know?
Would that be the transverse ligament?
Perfect. This is my transverse scapular ligament, which means that this is the suprascapular notch that it's going over. And I don't want to get this area too busy because we're going to have some things to put in there. So are we good on kind of like all the labels? I know there are like some fossas that we didn't label, right? Like that big X in the middle. This is our axis of rotation. So this is just kind of like how this thing can kind of move up and down. Are we good on this front a little bit? Okay, we're going to start talking about some movements. So we can do like, let's just talk about some easy movements of up and down. So I'm going to put some arrows on here. And I'm going to say that, well, we could move this whole thing up Or we could move this whole thing down. What muscles move this up? Alvin? Can you name a muscle that moves the scapula in elevation?
Would trapezius be one of them?
Yeah, trapezius partially does this. So this will be elevation, moving and shifting that scapula up. Elevation can be partially contributed by the trapezius. Audrey, could you name me another muscle that does elevation? I think you cut out for just a little bit.
Hear me now?
Oh yeah, you're quiet, but say it nice and loud. You've got another muscle.
The levator scapulae.
Perfect. So we've got levator, scapulae. And then Allison, can you name me my last muscle that would help elevate my trapezia or elevate my scapula?
I'm not sure. I might have to phone a friend.
Okay. Daniela, could you tell me?
I think I'm gonna have to phone a friend as well.
Garrett, you got it?
Rhomboids.
Perfect. So if we think about rhomboids on that medial border, some of the upper part of these rhomboids, because they are oriented like this, are going to pull and help lift a little bit. They are not just completely transverse. If they were completely transverse, they would only act in retraction of the scapula. Okay, great. So we have our elevation. We also have depression of the scapula. Jen, can you tell me the muscle that depresses the scapula?
Trying to think about it. Sorry. Hang on. Does the trap?
Trapezius. That's actually the only one that does it.
Okay, good, because I couldn't think of another one. Okay.
Awesome. Okay. We also have the movement. So we have depression, we have elevation. We also have protraction and retraction. So if we're going to move the shoulder blades and pinch them together, this is retraction. And if we are kind of sticking the scapula onto the thorax, that's protraction. Mara, could you name me the muscle that does protraction?
Protraction. Does the teres do any of protraction?
No, to keep this on the thorax, this muscle needs to attach from the scapula to the thorax itself.
I
Okay,
think I'm
can
gonna
you
need
help
to
her out?
phone a friend. Or serratus?
Oh, no, you have it. There you go. Serratus anterior. Okay. And then, let's see.
I have a quick question. Sorry.
Yeah.
In my head, I guess I was thinking that serratus would retract it because when you shorten it, doesn't it like pull it back?
Maybe I have my words mixed up. I'm pretty sure retraction is just pulling your scapula to meet midline. And
Right.
that protraction is to like round your shoulders and pull them forward. So posterior and like pulling backwards and taking like all of your shoulder joint to pull back. It's that retraction. And then to go forward and move everything more anterior is that protraction.
Okay, I think Leobardo said that in the chat too. I was flipping anterior and posterior.
Gotcha. Okay. Retraction, Brianna, then tell me what muscle is going to help you pinch and move your shoulder blades backwards.
That would be the serratus posterior.
Those ones actually don't attach to the scapula, so they can't. Charlie, you want to help her out?
Yeah, the rhomboids.
Perfect. And then this is pretty much going to be one of the muscles that helps. And there's only one other muscle that does this. Ryan, can you name me the other muscle that does retraction?
Oh, would that be the transverse trapezius?
Nice, that middle part of trapezius. So trapezius is an elevator, a depressor, and a retractor. Okay, and now here's where like scapula can move and it can rotate. So now we need to start kind of like putting on a couple things that can rotate and move that glenoid fossa upwards to show off your armpit to the world, because why not? And then we can also move that glenoid fossa down. Now this would be that downward rotation. Downward rotation. And then we also have upward rotation. So showing and moving the glenoid fossa up is also upward rotation if you want to put your arrow closer to glenoid fossa, and then kind of moving that joint downward would also be that downward rotation. So up rotation, down rotation. If you guys want to move it closer to glenoid fossa, that may be easier to think about showing that flat kind of cuppy surface up and then show that cuppy fossa down. Okay, upward rotation is going to be contributed from levator scap as well as the trapezius. And I know that this is a little weird to think about, but I am going to kind of draw on those attachments to kind of remind us why this is happening. So if I have trapezius attached here with those fibers on the spine of the scapula, you can see that it's pulling the spine to move that way, which is then going to show and move that glenoid fossa upward. Samantha, had a question?
Yeah, I have levator scapulae as a downward rotation. I don't know if I just wrote it wrong or if it's that way on the list as well.
Oh, whoops. Yeah, no, I have that one as downward rotation as well.
Okay.
I meant to put one other muscle other than trapezius. So trapezius is attached there. I did not actually draw levator scap on yet. There is one other muscle that's going to help us do upward rotation. And it's because we have a muscle attaching from inferior angle pulling this way to kind of also help with that movement going this way and that way. Samantha, what muscle attaches at inferior angle?
Let's see. Would it be the levator spine?
This one would be serratus anterior. So this one is going to anchor down at that inferior angle to start pulling and rotating the scapula around and up. Because you can kind of see like from that axis of rotation in the center, I have muscle fibers going this way for levator, or sorry, serratus anterior. And then I have muscles going this way for trapezius. Donovan, have a question?
Would the Perry's major also contribute towards some upwards rotation because of that attachment site?
Not medial.
I don't think it's classically one of the muscles that we're going to know. I think we want to more be thinking of muscles that have like action on, that are stuck on the scapula itself, as well as like then to thorax. Because if we want to rotate and move this bone on top of the thorax itself, we want to have an anchor from thorax to scapula. If you'll notice, all the muscles on here are attaching that way, because then as soon as I start throwing like the teres majors and infraspinatus and supraspinatus, then I have like more action on like the shoulder joint itself and more action on the humerus. But like, yes, if my humerus were anchored, and then we can talk about how the scapula would move a little bit, sure, but it's not like a primary objective I want you to know. Let's just think of like scapula and thorax. Samantha?
I didn't put serratus anterior on my list. I know it's come up a lot today. Is that something we need to have on our radar a little bit more than I guess I have?
Yeah, I think, adding that one muscle to the list as soon as we're now talking about like rotations, as well as like some of these like innervations, it is one of like the last muscles that you guys know and is kind of seen on superficial back, because this muscle, as soon as we start pulling away, like latissimus is all right here. And then levator scap, we actually can see like kind of sneaking up around the border of the inferior angle of the scapula.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's kind of considered a back muscle, kind of considered a thorax muscle. It's kind of like weird to loop in to like either or, because it's not really the front and it's not really the back. We can see the knife's edge on the front, but like the main muscle belly and how it gets innervated is like on the back. Okay, and then we talk about downward rotation. So we have two muscles that are going to do downward rotation for us. This one will be our levator scapulae. And if I would have drawn this one on, I would have been like, whoops, I put that in the wrong orientation. Because if you think about it, it is attached to the superior angle, but it also has part of that medial border on it. So if I shorten this, we're actually kind of moving the tip of the spine, or like this superior angle. We're rotating it and moving it to the side a little bit more, which then contributes to downward rotation, if that makes sense. That you're taking the tip and then you're going to kind of move it just a little bit as those fibers are shortening in the neck. And so then that is going to contribute to that downward rotation of the scapula. Which means there's another muscle that attaches on the medial border to be able to kind of pull in those fibers orientation. That's also going to help with that downward rotation and this spiral of movement. Which is, Donovan, could you tell me what muscle that is?
The rhomboids.
Perfect. This is a good split to know of like who does upward rotation, who does downward rotation, who does retraction, who does protraction. And this is yet another way to group some muscles. So then this drawing is then like pretty much complete for just movements of the scapula. Questions on the rest of how the scapula moves or why some of these do the motion that they do? Or did this feel very clarifying? George?
Hey, did you say that the levator scapular also upward rotation? I think I
Um,
misunderstood.
I miswrote that.
Okay,
It was serratus anterior because levator scap attaches like partially on this really high edge up here, which then can only move the tip this way, which is then fitting my like spiral of downward rotation.
Can we just go over, so the retraction is adduction? Is that correct?
Yep, because like remember we add things to the body, so retraction would be another way to say like adduction.
Okay.
And then this
I
one
just
would be abduction. Yeah, good other things to put on here for sure. And then Daniela?
Oh, sorry. So for the downward rotation, I
Mhm.
would think the latissimus dorsi would help in that. Is it because it's not attached to the scapula? It's not
Yeah.
included?
So latissimus dorsi is down there for sure. And it does have orientations that maybe like if it looped over, you could kind of see it spinning in that direction. The latissimus, you're right, does not attach at all to the scapula. Therefore, it can have no action on the scapula. Only muscles that attach on that bone and cross that joint are going to have changes and like ability to move the bones. Now, all of these muscles, like Donovan pointed out earlier, we're focused on the ones that are attached from thorax onto the scapula, because this is how the scapula itself is moving. Therefore, these muscles are all attached to scapula as well as attached to thorax. That way they can have action on this bone. Okay, clear? Ish. I'm sure you guys will like spend some more time re-going over these as well on your own. Okay, are we ready to throw some arteries on here? I am probably just going to go ahead and go back and pull up maybe another blank one to start putting arteries on, if that's okay. I didn't realize how busy my screen was going to get, so we're just going to have to do it this way. Now we did label each of these pieces, so I am just going to go ahead and like remove a couple of these tags. That's fine. Is everyone still going to be fine with the without the bony landmarks on here? If they are important, I promise I will bring them up, like the suprascapular notch, as well as that transverse scapular ligament, suprascapular ligament. Important. Yes, we will be talking about those for this. So let's go ahead and throw some of these arteries on here. We have a very massive artery coming from behind and a lot more anterior and to this scapula. Trina, could you tell me what artery this is that's going to be really thick and coming from the front part area?
The right subclavian.
Perfect. Now we can say right subclavian, but we could also, like if this were mirrored, left subclavian would be fine if I did the left scapula. But with the orientation I drew this in, it would be right scapula. So right subclavian. Now this right subclavian, just because I know that like anatomy is maybe like where the heck was this coming from? Your heart would have been here. It has all of these branches off of the aorta. That first branch is going to be my brachiocephalic trunk. This brachiocephalic will split up into the right subclavian and right common carotid. We're then also going to have that left common carotid and the left subclavian. So this would be my right common carotid. Just so that you guys can get a little oriented, maybe pull back to undergrad anatomy just a little bit, so you're not just like, wait, what the heck is a subclavian again? So just recall that these are big branches off of the aorta. We really haven't traveled that far from the heart yet. That subclavian can be found underneath the clavicle, hence why it is called the subclavian. We are going to have a couple smaller branches off of the subclavian, one of which will be a named trunk called the thyrocervical trunk. Now, the thyrocervical trunk is named appropriately. So in anatomy, we can break up some words a little bit. Thyro means it actually does have a branch to the thyroid, and cervical means it does actually drop off branches for the neck. And then it gets a little bonus branch. So we have, other arteries that come off of this thing, but we are going to focus on one in particular that is going to go over the top of that transverse cervical ligament. So if this is going over, and I'm drawing this on the top, goes over that ligament, comes underneath and around that little notch near the glenoid. This is called my suprascapular artery. Now, this artery would have been this like big old subclavian. We could have kind of found underneath everything, kind of continuing and spitting out as kind of a different name. Now, we name things different in anatomy because everything cannot just be called the whatever branch of aorta. We do give things different name for the region that they're in. And so instead of saying like the aorta under the clavicle, the aorta in the armpit, the aorta in the arm, we kind of do name things a little bit like that. So now that we're truly in the armpit, that region is called the axilla. So then we actually have our axillary artery because we're more in like the axilla underneath that armpit region. As we head into the arm, then this one will change names to the brachial, which you guys do feel the pulse of. Like if you lift up that bicep a little bit, kind of near cubital fossa, we feel that pulse in our arm, and that's brachial, which came from axillary, which came from subclavian. Okay, off of the axillary, we do have a branch come off. And this one's kind of like a little bit under the scapula because axillary artery is underneath or sub to the scapula. So this will be our subscapular artery. So we have a suprascapular that's on top, and we have one that's starting to branch off from underneath the scapula called the subscapular artery. Now, because this one kind of came from underneath, it has to kind of loop around to get onto the back side of the scapula again. And when it loops and creates this circle, this one gets to be named the circumflex scapular artery. Another one, latissimus, is a massive muscle and it's going to need a lot of blood. So we do have another branch that comes off of this to kind of help with the latissimus. This one is nicely named as the artery that supplies latissimus is exactly the same. So this will be our thoracodorsal artery. This is kind of running near that inferior angle to jump into lat, as well as to help supply the scapula. Remember that these arteries have a lot of little branches, and when they change names like that, you know, we don't always give all these names to all these tiny little new branches. So latissimus is right there with the thoracodorsal nerve and the thoracodorsal artery going in together into the latissimus, but thoracodorsal is so close to the inferior angle of that scapula that it will also be supplying blood to the scapula. Now I can look at this drawing, and then there's a huge region of the scapula that does still not have any blood. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that branch off of the subclavian and trace it down this medial border. This one will be my dorsal. Scapular artery. This will travel with the dorsal scapular nerve to innervate, well, the nerve would innervate the rhomboids as well as levator, and then the artery supplies both of those things as well. You can see how these two arteries are meeting up. Now in drawings, like you may see like an artist kind of really branch them, but in all honesty, it just is truly like a continuous tube, like Pascoe was talking about in his lectures. And when I find them in the cadavers, they look absolutely no different. But would I tag something like right around here and be like, what is that? No, that's rude. I would tag dorsal scapular like truly up here where there could be like nothing else other than dorsal scap. I tag thoracodorsal all the way up here so you can see two arteries branch off of subscapular. We don't tag things at anastomosis spots because it is the connection of two different arteries. So this is an anastomosis. You can see how circumflex scapular wrapping around is so close to the suprascapular. So these are also going to anastomose. June draws an at sign just because they're anastomosing. Now, there will be like many branches of like the dorsal scapular kind of like reaching over and reaching around to truly supply all of the infraspinatus as well as like teres minor. And circumflex will also branch. So you're going to see a couple of anastomoses like between these two as well. Now, anastomoses are just like driving in a neighborhood. That if you were driving around, that there's a roadblock because there's construction or there's just traffic in general, that you can take different paths and reroute yourself a little bit to still get to where you need to go. Arteries do not have valves for a very specific reason. They don't have valves because you can flow retrograde inside of these. So if you think that like, oh, well, dorsal scap only ever really goes this way. Well, say that something was blocked like right here, that you have a big blockage or pressure or whatever. I could actually take blood from the subscapular, push through here, go through thoracodorsal, go up dorsal scapular, and then get to the subclavian to then push into the thyrocervical trunk. I can reroute blood in so many ways. Just make sure that you don't think about like arteries only going one way. Kaylee?
I just wanted to ask for clarification. The session objective says to know collateral circulation. Is that the same as anastomosis?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do these anastomoses make sense? We've got all of the named arteries put on here. Now we did have a couple other arteries that we started talking about with like the spaces, like in quadrangular space and the triangular interval and the triangular space. So maybe let's just throw one or two of these on. Let's just go ahead and throw another one that would be looping around the humerus because the humerus is going to be over here, articulating with that glenoid fossa. I'm drawing this one to wrap around the back of the humerus since we are very posterior right now. This will be our posterior humeral circumflex. That will be traveling, remember, with the axillary nerve. And that we can see our circumflex scapular artery inside of the triangle that's kind of just more medial than that quadrangular space. We also have another artery that does come off. So as soon as this does change to the brachial, we have another very loopy, swervy artery that drops off brachial, goes very deep into the arm and loops in the groove of the humerus. This one would be that profunda brachii. Profunda means deep in anatomy. So this would be the deep artery of the arm, which is maybe how else you would see this. And that's just going to kind of help put a couple of the arteries on that you've seen from some of the spaces. Pascoe doesn't have this on his drawing, but I just think, while we're starting to look at spaces, we may as well understand some of these arteries that are dropping off. Profunda brachii will be traveling with the radial nerve. So let's just go ahead and maybe throw on a couple nerves in here. If this yellow is not dark enough and you guys cannot see that very well, please just let me know. But I'm going to go ahead and throw on the radial nerve with profunda brachii. I'm going to go ahead and throw the axillary nerve alongside of the posterior humeral circumflex. I could just go ahead and have an artery sneaking or a nerve sneaking from underneath that transverse scapular ligament going with that suprascapular artery. This would be my suprascapular nerve. We also have the same name nerve traveling with dorsal scapular artery to have my dorsal scapular nerve. And I would also have the thoracodorsal nerve traveling with the thoracodorsal artery. I like having the nerves on here just a little bit to remind you of things that travel with named arteries, just as a reminder. I know this was supposed to be an artery drawing. I just think it's a little helpful every once in a while to remind yourself that there are still nerves around here. Jen?
Would you mind taking a different color and just showing us where the quadrangle and the two triangles are in this?
Yeah.
Sorry, could you repeat the name of the nerve with the profunda brachii?
Yes, profunda brachii has the radial nerve, which would innervate the triceps. So I'm going to take a purple. I think that looks different enough. And we do have our humerus that would kind of be more straight up and down. We have our teres major and let's do our long head of triceps. So attaching onto that humerus and making more of an angle attaching to the scapula that way, we have our long head of triceps. And then I have teres major, as well as, I guess, that this edge, as well as kind of maybe just teres minor. And now here's where we're really starting to see these spaces. So you can see profunda brachii and radial got caught in the triangle down here. And we've got the circumflex scapular being caught in that big triangle. Usually we just see circumflex, subscapular is kind of small. I did draw that probably annoyingly long. And then the axillary and posterior humeral circumflex are being caught in the quadrangular space.
Can you remind me what the two triangles are called? I think I mislabeled them on my drawing, so my brain is scrambled.
Yes. So we've got let's just highlight and put some of these things on here. So here we go. Here's our, ooh, that is too large. Quadrangular space. And then as we border with all the muscles down here, this is the triangular interval. And then this one bound by both the teres would be the triangular space.